The wedding is off. I don't love you anymore." Brandon said it loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear, his voice sharp and deliberate, like he wanted the words to ricochet off the walls before they reached me. The Saturday lunch crowd at the Italian bistro in Portland, Oregon, fell into an unnatural silence. Forks paused midair. Conversations died halfway through sentences. I could feel at least 30 pairs of eyes turning toward our table near the window, the one Brandon had specifically requested when we arrived, as if this seat had always been part of the plan. I sat there for a moment, my fork still suspended above my plate of chicken parmesan. The words hovered between us like smoke after an explosion, thick and undeniable. His friends at the adjacent table, the ones he had insisted join us for what he'd called a casual weekend lunch, were watching with barely concealed anticipation. They leaned forward slightly, as if waiting for a performance to begin. "My name is Megan, and I am 27 years old." At that exact moment, sitting across from the man I had spent 4 years of my life with, something inside me didn't shatter the way I'd always imagined it would. Instead, it shifted quietly, decisively, like a lock clicking into place rather than breaking apart. I set my fork down gently. Brandon was watching me closely, his expression one I had seen before but never truly recognized until that instant. It was a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation, like a child waiting to see what happens after pulling the wings off a butterfly. "Thank you for being honest," I said. My own voice surprised me. It was steady, calm, unbothered. His eyebrows lifted slightly. That was not the reaction he had expected. Slowly, deliberately, I reached down to my left hand and removed the engagement ring. The same ring he had proposed with at his parents' anniversary dinner 2 years ago, making sure everyone was watching then, too. I slipped it into the pocket of my jacket. "You know what?" I continued, feeling an unfamiliar calm settle over me. "I think I'm going to throw a narrow escape party." One of his friends snorted. A few others chuckled. Brandon's smirk deepened. He was enjoying this, enjoying what he thought was my denial, my attempt at humor to mask humiliation. But in that moment, I understood something with startling clarity. He had choreographed this. He had chosen the setting, invited the witnesses, positioned the audience, all so he could watch me crumble in public. I didn't crumble. "A narrow escape party," I repeated, more to myself than to anyone else. "Yes, I think that's exactly what this calls for." The laughter at his friends' table died down when they realized I wasn't crying. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't creating the scene Brandon had clearly anticipated. Instead, I reached for my water glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. "Megan," Brandon said, irritation edging into his voice now. "Did you hear what I said?" "I heard you perfectly," I replied. "You don't love me anymore. The wedding is off. I believe I already thanked you for your honesty." His jaw tightened. This was not going according to his plan. I pulled my wallet from my purse and placed enough cash on the table to cover my portion of the meal, plus a generous tip for the server, who would probably have an interesting story to tell after her shift. "I have to say," I added, standing and gathering my things, "you picked quite a setting for this announcement. A crowded restaurant on a Saturday afternoon. Your friends conveniently here to witness everything. Very theatrical." His face reddened slightly. "I thought you deserved the truth." "And I got it," I said simply. "More truth than you probably intended to give me." I glanced at his friends, Tyler, Josh, and Kevin, who were now exchanging uneasy looks. The amusement had drained from their faces, replaced by something closer to confusion. "Gentlemen," I said, offering them a small nod, "thank you for being here today. Your presence has been illuminating." As I walked toward the exit, I could feel every stare in the restaurant burning into my back. But instead of shame or humiliation, what I felt was something else entirely. Clarity. 4 years. I had given Brandon 4 years of my life, and in one carefully orchestrated moment, he had shown me exactly who he was. Not accidentally, not emotionally, deliberately. The autumn air hit my face as I stepped outside, cool and grounding. I took a deep breath. My hands weren't shaking. My eyes were dry. I walked to my car with measured steps, unlocked the door, and sat behind the wheel. Only then, alone in the quiet of my car, did I allow myself to fully process what had just happened. And even then, what washed over me wasn't devastation. It was recognition. I had just watched Brandon reveal his true self, and the man he revealed was someone I did not want to marry. The realization felt almost liberating. My phone buzzed, a text from my best friend, Natalie. "How was lunch?" I stared at the screen for a moment before typing back. "Wedding is canceled. I'll explain later, but I'm okay. Actually, I think I'm better than okay." Her reply came instantly. "What? I'm coming over tonight." I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. As I did, I glanced back at the restaurant one last time. Through the window, I could see Brandon still sitting at the table, his friends gathered around him now. He was probably telling them I was in shock, that I hadn't fully processed what happened yet. He had no idea what was actually happening. He had just handed me the key to a door I hadn't even realized was locked. And I was finally ready to open it. The drive home gave me more clarity than the past 4 years combined. As the city blurred past my windshield, memories began rearranging themselves in my mind, no longer softened by excuses or filtered through hope. Scenes I had once brushed off as misunderstandings now replayed with uncomfortable precision. I wasn't heartbroken. I was awake. I met Brandon when I was 23, fresh out of college, working my first real job as an assistant event coordinator at a conference center in downtown Portland. I was ambitious then, full of ideas, convinced I'd start my own event planning business before I turned 30. Brandon was 25, confident, charming in a way that made you feel chosen when his attention landed on you. Our first date was at a coffee shop near the waterfront. He listened intently as I talked about my dreams, nodding at all the right moments, asking thoughtful questions. At the time, I thought it meant he cared. Looking back, I understood something darker. He wasn't connecting. He was collecting information. By the end of our first year together, my life had begun to quietly orbit his preferences. He didn't like my college friends, said they were immature, directionless, holding me back, so I saw them less. He thought my apartment was inconvenient for his commute, so I moved closer to his side of town. He called my dream of starting a business risky and irresponsible, told me stability mattered more than passion. I put my plans on hold, convincing myself this was what compromise looked like. That's what relationships are about, right? Give and take. Except the giving was almost entirely mine. When my friends questioned his behavior, I defended him with excuses I didn't realize I'd memorized. "He's just stressed." "He didn't mean it like that." "You don't really know him." I said those things so often they stopped feeling like lies. Last Christmas, my mother had pulled me aside in the kitchen while Brandon talked politics with my father. "Megan," she said softly, "does he make you happy, truly happy?" I smiled automatically. Of course, we're getting married. But happy wasn't the word I would have chosen if I'd been honest. Comfortable, maybe, invested, locked in. The engagement came 18 months into our relationship. Brandon proposed at his parents' 40th anniversary party, dropping to one knee in front of nearly 200 people. Phones rose instantly to record it. Applause filled the room before I could even process what was happening. I said yes, because what else could I say? That was the first time I noticed his love for an audience, though I didn't yet understand it. He loved moments that made him look impressive, loved performances disguised as intimacy. Wedding planning became a slow erosion of my voice. I wanted something small and personal. Brandon wanted a grand event with 300 guests, most of whom I'd never met. I wanted a simple venue. He wanted the most expensive hotel ballroom in the city because that's where people of our status celebrated. Every time I pushed back, he reframed my resistance as selfishness. "This isn't just about you, Megan," he'd say. "This is about our future." He meant his future. Somewhere along the way, I stopped trusting my own instincts. Brandon had a talent for making his preferences sound like logic, while my desires sounded emotional, impractical, unreasonable. As I pulled into my apartment complex that afternoon, another realization hit me hard. I had been shrinking. The woman who once argued confidently in meetings now second-guessed every opinion. The woman who dreamed of building something of her own now asked permission to go to lunch with her friends. I'd mistaken compliance for love, silence for maturity. My phone buzzed. A text from Brandon. That wasn't the reaction I expected. We should talk. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering. For the first time in 4 years, I didn't rush to manage his emotions. I didn't reply. That evening, Natalie showed up at my door with 2 bottles of wine and a look that could only be described as protective fury. "Tell me everything," she said, settling onto my couch, "and don't leave out a single detail." So I told her about the restaurant, the announcement, the friends watching like spectators, the way the whole thing felt staged from the moment we arrived. Her expression shifted from concern to grim understanding. "I knew it," she said quietly. "I knew something was wrong with him." "You did?" I asked. "Megan," she said gently, "I've been your best friend since freshman year. I watched you change. The woman who used to argue with professors and stay up all night building business plans started asking permission to have coffee with me." A flush of embarrassment crept up my neck. "Why didn't you say something?" "Because you weren't ready to hear it," she replied. "And because if I pushed too hard, he would have used it to isolate you further. I was waiting for you to see it yourself." Her words settled over me like truth, finally landing where it belonged. "The thing that scares me most," I admitted, "is that he planned it. The setting, the witnesses, everything." Natalie nodded. "He wanted to break you, publicly, so he could control the story." "But I didn't break," I said slowly. "No," she smiled, "and that's what's driving him crazy." As if summoned, my phone buzzed again. "I think you're in shock. This isn't like you. Call me when you're ready to talk like an adult." Natalie scoffed. "Men like him expect tears, bargaining, desperation. When they don't get it, they panic." I turned my phone face down. "I said I'd throw a narrow escape party," I said thoughtfully. "What if I actually do it?" Natalie's eyes lit up. "You should." "Not to mock him," I continued, "but to take control of the narrative before he rewrites it. Brandon would tell his version. He'd paint himself as the rational hero escaping a difficult woman. If I stayed silent, his story would win. But if I framed this as freedom instead of rejection, the power shifted. That night, something inside me hardened in the best possible way. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to explain. And I wasn't going to disappear quietly. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to Brandon. I was choosing myself. And I had a feeling this was only the beginning. The silence that followed my decision not to respond to Brandon was louder than any argument we had ever had. Sunday morning arrived with a flurry of messages from him, each one revealing more desperation than the last. "This silent treatment is immature, Megan. Call me." "I didn't do this to hurt you. We need to talk like adults." "People are asking me what happened. You need to help me explain this properly." I read them all without replying. For the first time in 4 years, my actions were not arranged around Brandon's comfort. The quiet felt powerful, almost addictive. While he spiraled, I got practical. The wedding had been scheduled for April, 6 months away. Deposits had been paid, contracts signed. Ironically, almost everything was under my name. Brandon had insisted it made things simpler. Now I understood why. He never wanted his name attached if things went wrong. I started with the venue. The coordinator, Patricia, was someone I'd worked with professionally before. When I explained the situation, she listened quietly. "I'm so sorry," she said. "The deposit is non-refundable." "I understand," I replied. "But," she continued, "given the circumstances, I can offer you a full credit for a future event." An idea clicked into place. "Actually," I said slowly, "I might want to use that space sooner than expected." Her pause was curious, not judgmental. What kind of event? A celebration, I said, of a new beginning. The caterer was sympathetic. The photographer refunded half the deposit without hesitation. The florist, Dominic, laughed softly when I told him the wedding was off. Honestly, he said, I wondered how long it would last. What do you mean? I asked. Megan, he said gently, every time you came in here, you looked stressed. You kept changing things because he wanted something different. Brides change their minds all the time, but you were trying to please someone who couldn't be pleased. That comment stayed with me long after the call ended. By Wednesday, the narrow escape party had transformed from a symbolic idea into a concrete plan. Same venue, same deposit, 3 weeks away. Then something caught my attention. While reviewing our shared wedding documents, I noticed a folder I hadn't created. Priority notifications. Inside were 40 names, Brandon's friends, his colleagues, distant relatives. Next to each name was a note. Wedding update, send immediately. My stomach tightened. I checked the document history. Brandon had created it 2 weeks before the restaurant lunch. 2 weeks before he publicly ended our engagement. I kept digging. There was a draft message, prepared in advance. As some of you witnessed today, I made the difficult decision to end my engagement to Megan. This wasn't easy, but I realized I couldn't commit to a future with someone who wasn't aligned with my values and goals. The words were clinical, polished, designed to paint him as thoughtful and decisive, and me as the problem. Then I found the messages. Group chat with his friends, timestamped the morning of the lunch. Today's the day. Bistro at 12:30. I want you there to witness. This is going to be good. Tyler replied. Finally, been waiting for this. I'll record everything. My hands started to shake. This wasn't a breakup. It was a production. Then I found another message, sent the night before, to someone named Rebecca. Tomorrow I'm ending things with Megan. I know you've been patient. I can't wait to be free and start our new chapter. Rebecca. I didn't know her, but Brandon clearly did. I leaned back from my laptop, heart pounding. This wasn't just about ending a relationship. He had an audience assembled, a replacement ready, and a narrative prepared. He wanted documentation of my humiliation. And he hadn't gotten it. My phone buzzed again. I don't understand why you're ignoring me. This isn't healthy behavior. For the first time since Saturday, I responded. I'm not ignoring you. I'm just no longer interested in conversations that serve your needs at the expense of my own. We're done communicating. His reply came instantly. That's cold. I expected more from you. I turned off my phone. That evening, Natalie called, her voice tight with anger. I just heard something you need to know, she said. Tyler's girlfriend has been talking. What did she say? Brandon, been telling people for months that you're emotionally unstable, that you're clingy, controlling, and he was afraid to end things privately because of how you'd react. The words hit like ice water. That's not true. I know, Natalie said firmly. That's why the breakup was public. He wanted witnesses. He wanted proof. Proof. Proof that never came. That's why he's panicking now, she continued. You didn't fall apart. His story doesn't make sense anymore. After the call ended, I sat alone in my apartment replaying the past 4 years through a new lens. All the times Brandon told me what other people supposedly thought of me. My friends think you're too intense. My mom thinks you're not ambitious enough. My colleagues say you're awkward at parties. I'd believed him, adjusted myself, shrunk. He hadn't just controlled me. He'd been shaping how others saw me, laying the groundwork for his exit. But here was the mistake he made. He underestimated me. I still had access to everything. Shared accounts, shared documents, timelines he never thought I'd examine because he assumed I'd be too broken to function. I wasn't broken. I started organizing everything. Messages, screenshots, call logs, dates. Not to expose him publicly, not to scream or retaliate, but to understand the full truth. The narrow escape party wasn't going to be about Brandon. It was going to be about me. And if the truth happened to surface along the way, that wouldn't be revenge. That would simply be reality catching up with him. As I drafted the invitation, a calm certainty settled in my chest. This story wasn't over. It was just beginning to turn in my favor. By the end of the week, I had learned something unsettling about clarity. It doesn't arrive gently. It doesn't comfort you. It dismantles the version of reality you worked so hard to survive in. Thursday night, I sat on my living room floor surrounded by printed pages. Screenshots, contracts, timelines, messages Brandon never thought I'd read carefully. What disturbed me most wasn't the cheating or the manipulation. It was the consistency. Nothing about what he did was impulsive. Every move had been calculated months in advance. Every conversation he'd had with me, every concern he pretended to voice, every moment he painted himself as patient and understanding, it all fit neatly into a long-term strategy. A strategy designed to exit cleanly while ensuring I carried the blame. I had loved him honestly. He had studied me professionally. That realization didn't make me cry. It made me still. Friday morning, I received an email from Brandon's mother. Subject line, concerned asterisk. Megan. We were shocked by Brandon's behavior at lunch. He told us you've been overwhelmed lately and asked him to end things publicly to avoid a scene. We hope you're taking care of yourself. I read it twice. Then a third time. The lie wasn't sloppy. It was elegant. It made him the reluctant hero and me the fragile liability. I could almost admire the craftsmanship if it hadn't been built on my silence. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the email to a new folder I'd titled Pattern Asterisk. That afternoon, I met Natalie for coffee. She watched my face carefully as I stirred my drink. "You're calm," she said. "That scares me a little." "I'm not numb," I replied. "I'm focused." She leaned in. "On what?" "On not letting him rewrite 4 years of my life." Natalie exhaled slowly. "People are starting to notice things don't add up." That caught my attention. "What do you mean?" "Tyler posted a video from the restaurant," she said. "You know, the one Brandon wanted so badly." My stomach tightened. "And?" "He expected tears, you standing up, something dramatic. Instead, you look composed. Confused, maybe, but not unstable." She pulled out her phone and showed me the comments. "This feels staged. Why does he look prepared, and she looks blindsided?" If she was unstable, wouldn't she be the one causing a scene? Brandon's narrative was cracking. Not because I defended myself, but because I refused to perform the role he assigned me. That night, he tried a new approach. "I've been worried about you," his text read. "Ignoring me isn't healthy. I think you should talk to someone." Concern as control, again. I typed, deleted, then finally responded. "I'm not unwell, Brandon. I'm just no longer available for manipulation. Please stop contacting me." 3 dots appeared instantly. "I don't know why you're being so hostile, after everything I did for you." There it was. The invisible ledger. The unspoken debt he believed I owed him for choosing me. I blocked his number. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Rebecca emailed me. Subject line, I didn't know. "Megan, I'm not sure if you'll read this, but I need to say something. Brandon told me you were already separated, that the engagement was just a formality you hadn't announced yet. I found out the truth yesterday, and I want you to know I ended things immediately." I stared at the screen. This wasn't an apology. It was a confirmation. Brandon hadn't just lied to me. He'd lied to everyone, tailoring stories to fit whoever was listening. I replied with one sentence. "I appreciate the honesty. I hope you take care of yourself." No bitterness, no confrontation. I didn't need it. Because something inside me had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was observing behaviorally. And when you observe instead of absorb, patterns lose their power. The narrow escape party invitations went out that evening. Not dramatic, not accusatory. Just simple. A celebration of choosing myself. New beginnings deserve witnesses too. Some people declined quietly. Others responded with enthusiasm that surprised me. A few messages stood out. I'm proud of you. I always wondered why you looked so tired. This makes sense now. Each one felt like a piece of myself returning. Sunday afternoon, Brandon tried one last tactic. He showed up at my apartment. I didn't open the door. Megan, he called through the wood, voice controlled, rehearsed. You're embarrassing yourself. People are talking. Yes, I said calmly from the other side. They finally are. You're making this harder than it needs to be. For you, I corrected. Silence. Then softer. We could fix this. I almost laughed. Fix this meant restoring his control. Fix this meant erasing my awakening. There's nothing to fix, I said. There's only something to accept. And what's that? He asked. That I see you now. I heard him exhale sharply. You'll regret this, he said. No, I replied. I already regret staying blind as long as I did. Footsteps retreated. When I finally sat down on my couch, hands steady, heart calm, I understood something vital. Closure doesn't come from answers. It comes from alignment. I was no longer out of alignment with myself. And Brandon. He was about to learn what happens when the person you tried to control becomes the one who tells the truth, quietly, clearly, and without fear. The story wasn't nearing its end. It was tightening its focus. The week leading up to the event unfolded with an eerie calm, the kind that settles in right before something irreversible happens. I woke up each morning lighter, not because the situation was resolved, but because I had stopped fighting reality. I no longer rehearsed conversations in my head. I no longer wondered how Brandon might interpret my actions. His perspective had finally lost its authority over my life. Monday afternoon, I received a message from Patricia at the venue. We've had a few calls, she said carefully. People asking what kind of event this is. Some seemed nervous. I smiled faintly. Let them be. Because nervous meant curious. And curious meant the truth was already moving without me pushing it. That evening, Natalie came over with her laptop and a stack of printed invitations. You sure about this? She asked, not doubting me, just respecting the weight of the moment. I'm not here to humiliate anyone, I said. I'm here to stop being invisible. She nodded. Then this isn't revenge. No, I agreed. It's reclamation. Meanwhile, Brandon's behavior had become increasingly erratic. Mutual friends began reaching out, not with questions, but with confessions. He's been calling people nonstop. He asked me what you've been telling everyone. He wanted to know if I was coming to the party and what you might say. I didn't respond to any of it. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd been the anxious one, the overthinker, the emotional liability. Now he was unraveling, and I was steady. Wednesday brought another surprise. My father called. Megan, he said gently, your mother showed me something today. My stomach tightened. What kind of something? She received a message from Brandon, long one, explaining his side. I closed my eyes, and he said you were struggling emotionally, that he'd stayed longer than he should have because he felt responsible for you. My grip tightened around the phone. And what did you think? I asked quietly. There was a pause. Then my father said something I hadn't realized I'd needed to hear. I thought it sounded rehearsed, like a man justifying himself instead of telling the truth. Tears pricked my eyes, not from sadness but relief. We raised you to be strong, he continued. Strong people don't need to be explained away. I exhaled slowly. Thank you. After the call, I sat alone for a long time. Brandon was losing ground not because I was exposing him, but because his lies required constant maintenance. Truth, on the other hand, only needed consistency. Thursday night, I received one final email from him. Subject: we need to talk before you make a mistake. Megan, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this celebration is unnecessary and embarrassing. You're creating a narrative that isn't fair. I suggest you cancel it before things go too far. We can still end this privately and respectfully. I read it carefully. Then I archived it. Because respect doesn't come from secrecy. It comes from honesty. Friday arrived with unexpected messages of support. A coworker I hadn't spoken to in months wrote, "I'm glad you're choosing yourself." A former bridesmaid texted, "I always felt something was off. Proud of you." Even Dominic, the florist, sent a short note, "Glad you're blooming on your own terms." Each message stitched another piece of me back together. That evening, Natalie and I walked through the venue as staff set up. No white roses. No aisle. No altar. Instead, warm lighting, soft music, open space. At the center of the room stood a simple sign. Freedom doesn't need permission. I felt my throat tighten, not with fear but gratitude. Saturday morning, the day of the event, dawned bright and quiet. I stood in front of my mirror longer than usual, not judging, not correcting, just observing. I looked like myself again. No costume. No role. No apology. Natalie adjusted my jacket. "You ready?" "Yes," I said, and I meant it. Guests began arriving slowly. Some tentative, some smiling knowingly. Conversations hummed with curiosity, but no one asked invasive questions. They didn't need to. The absence of Brandon spoke louder than his presence ever had. Halfway through the evening, I noticed him. Standing near the entrance. Not invited. Watching. His posture was rigid, his expression controlled, but I could see it, the discomfort, the uncertainty. He wasn't the center here, he was just another observer. Our eyes met briefly. I didn't look away. I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. I simply held his gaze, steady and unafraid. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. He didn't miss me. He missed control. Natalie leaned over. "Do you want me to ask him to leave?" "No," I said calmly. "Let him stay." Because this wasn't about confrontation. It was about contrast. He stayed for 15 minutes, long enough to realize there was no speech condemning him, no slideshow, no dramatic reveal. Just people celebrating my freedom. Just me, unbroken, unashamed, unhidden. Then he left. Quietly. No one followed. As the night wound down, I stepped onto the small stage, not because I had planned a speech, but because silence asked for words. "I won't take much of your time," I said. "I just want to thank you for being here, not to witness an ending, but to honor a beginning. Sometimes choosing yourself looks dramatic from the outside, but from the inside, it feels like coming home." Applause filled the room, not loud, not forced, real. As I stepped down, something settled deep in my chest. This wasn't closure. It was momentum. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that Brandon's story was collapsing under the weight of its own lies. He just didn't realize yet how far the consequences would reach. That part was still coming. The morning after the event felt different from any other morning I could remember. Not dramatic. Not euphoric. Just quiet, grounded certainty. I woke up without the familiar tightness in my chest, without the reflex to check my phone for messages I might need to manage. For the first time in years, my peace wasn't conditional on someone else's mood. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was mine. By noon, the ripple effects began. Natalie called first. "You're not going to believe this." "Try me," I said calmly, sipping my coffee. "Brandon's scrambling. Hard. He's been calling people since early morning. Apparently, someone asked him why he showed up uninvited to your event. I smiled faintly, and he didn't have an answer that made sense. That was the problem with performances. They fall apart when the script changes. By Monday, the whispers had turned into conversations. Not accusations. Not gossip. Questions. Why did he plan the breakup in advance? Why were there messages to another woman before the engagement ended? Why did Megan seem calm while he seemed defensive? He had relied on one assumption: that I would collapse. When I didn't, everything else unraveled. That afternoon, I received a message from someone I hadn't expected. "Tyler, I think I owe you an apology." I stared at the screen for a long moment before responding. "Go on." "I didn't realize what he was doing," he wrote. "He framed it like you were unstable and needed witnesses. After seeing the party, after seeing you, it doesn't add up. I shouldn't have recorded that lunch." "You recorded it because you believed him," I replied. "That's on him, not you." There was a pause. "He asked me to take the video down," Tyler admitted. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because consequences don't require participation. They arrive on their own. Midweek brought something even more telling. Brandon's company quietly removed him from a leadership-facing project. No announcement, no explanation, just a subtle reassignment. Professional environments notice patterns too. Unstable narratives. Inconsistent behavior. Poor judgment in personal conduct. People who manipulate relationships rarely stop at romance. Thursday evening, I met my parents for dinner. My mother studied me carefully before smiling. "You look lighter." "I feel lighter," I said. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I wish you trusted yourself sooner." "So do I," I replied honestly, "but I trust myself now." That night, as I walked back into my apartment, I realized something profound. I wasn't replaying the past anymore. No rewinds. No alternate endings. No imagined confrontations. The chapter had closed naturally, because I had finally stopped trying to fix someone who benefited from being broken. Friday brought the final interaction. A message request. From Brandon. I didn't open it immediately. I let it sit there, not as punishment, but as proof. Proof that I no longer moved on his timeline. When I finally read it, the tone was different. Not angry. Not controlling. Small. "I never meant for things to get this out of hand. I think we both made mistakes. I hope one day you'll understand." I didn't reply. Because accountability doesn't hide behind both sides. And forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights flicker on one by one. I thought about the woman I had been when I met him. Eager. Hopeful. Unaware. I didn't judge her. She loved with what she knew at the time. But I was no longer her. I was the woman who recognized patterns. The woman who chose clarity over comfort. The woman who didn't need an audience to validate her truth. Weeks later, life settled into something steady and honest. I restarted my business plan, slowly, carefully, on my terms. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, not with guilt, but gratitude. And sometimes, in quiet moments, I noticed something unexpected. I wasn't angry at Brandon. I was indifferent. And indifference is the final stage of freedom. Because when someone no longer has access to your emotions, they have no power left to claim. People still ask, sometimes, what really happened. I don't give them a story. I give them a sentence. I chose myself. That's all they need. Because the truth doesn't need embellishment. It stands on its own. And so do I. Time passed the way it always does, quietly, without asking permission. Weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, the story that once felt heavy began to feel distant, like a chapter I could remember clearly without living inside it anymore. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. It became honest, and that was better. I moved apartments in early spring. Not because I needed to escape memories, but because I wanted a space that reflected who I was now. Smaller, brighter, mine. No compromises hidden in furniture choices, no explaining why I liked what I liked. Every decision felt intentional, even the small ones. One evening, while unpacking boxes, I found the old engagement ring. I had forgotten about it completely. It sat at the bottom of a drawer, wrapped in a receipt and false promises. For a moment, I held it up to the light, not with longing, not with bitterness, but with curiosity. This tiny object had once represented a future I was willing to sacrifice myself for. I put it back down. The next day, I sold it. Not ceremonially. Not emotionally. Practically. I used the money to fund the first step of my business. There was something deeply satisfying about that. As my life expanded, Brandon's quietly shrank out of relevance. I heard updates occasionally, not because I asked, but because people talk. He left his company within 6 months. Officially, it was a mutual decision. Unofficially, his reputation for control issues and poor judgment had followed him. Rebecca didn't come back. Neither did the friends who had enjoyed the drama when it served them. Patterns eventually reveal themselves everywhere. One afternoon, Natalie and I sat in the park watching people pass by. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. "Yes," I said, and then I feel grateful I didn't. Because I knew the answer. I would have disappeared slowly. I would have learned to call it love. I would have mistaken endurance for strength. Instead, I had learned something far more valuable. Peace is not passive. It is chosen. A year later, on an ordinary Tuesday, I received an email from a woman I didn't recognize. Subject, thank you. Megan, you don't know me personally, but I was at the restaurant the day your engagement ended. I was sitting 2 tables away. I remember how calm you were. That moment stayed with me. I left a relationship shortly after because I realized I was waiting to be humiliated publicly to give myself permission to leave. Thank you for showing me I didn't need that. I stared at the screen for a long time. This was the part no one talks about. When you choose yourself quietly, it echoes louder than any performance. That night, I wrote the email back with care. I'm glad you listened to yourself. That's where strength actually lives. I closed my laptop and smiled, not because of validation, but because I understood the full circle now. What Brandon had tried to take from me, my dignity, my voice, my narrative, had multiplied instead. Not into revenge. Into impact. I stopped thinking of my past as something that happened to me. It became something that shaped me. And I stopped seeing my story as a cautionary tale. It became a reminder. You don't need to prove your worth to people who benefit from your doubt. You don't need witnesses to walk away. You don't need permission to choose yourself. Some endings arrive loudly. Mine arrived quietly. And that was how I knew it was real. Because the strongest transformations don't ask to be seen. They simply are. Time passed the way it always does, quietly, without asking permission. Weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, the story that once felt heavy began to feel distant, like a chapter I could remember clearly without living inside it anymore. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. It became honest, and that was better. I moved apartments in early spring. Not because I needed to escape memories, but because I wanted a space that reflected who I was now. Smaller, brighter, mine. No compromises hidden in furniture choices, no explaining why I liked what I liked. Every decision felt intentional, even the small ones. One evening, while unpacking boxes, I found the old engagement ring. I had forgotten about it completely. It sat at the bottom of a drawer, wrapped in a receipt and false promises. For a moment, I held it up to the light, Not with longing, not with bitterness, but with curiosity. This tiny object had once represented a future I was willing to sacrifice myself for. I put it back down. The next day, I sold it. Not ceremonially. Not emotionally. Practically. I used the money to fund the first step of my business. There was something deeply satisfying about that. As my life expanded, Brandon's quietly shrank out of relevance. I heard updates occasionally, not because I asked, but because people talk. He left his company within 6 months. Officially, it was a mutual decision. Unofficially, his reputation for control issues and poor judgment had followed him. Rebecca didn't come back. Neither did the friends who had enjoyed the drama when it served them. Patterns eventually reveal themselves everywhere. One afternoon, Natalie and I sat in the park watching people pass by. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. "Yes," I said, and then I feel grateful I didn't. Because I knew the answer. I would have disappeared slowly. I would have learned to call it love. I would have mistaken endurance for strength. Instead, I had learned something far more valuable. Peace is not passive. It is chosen. A year later, on an ordinary Tuesday, I received an email from a woman I didn't recognize. Subject, "Thank you. Megan, you don't know me personally, but I was at the restaurant the day your engagement ended. I was sitting 2 tables away. I remember how calm you were. That moment stayed with me. I left a relationship shortly after because I realized I was waiting to be humiliated publicly to give myself permission to leave. Thank you for showing me I didn't need that." I stared at the screen for a long time. This was the part no one talks about. When you choose yourself quietly, it echoes louder than any performance. That night, I wrote the email back with care. "I'm glad you listened to yourself. That's where strength actually lives." I closed my laptop and smiled, not because of validation, but because I understood the full circle now. What Brandon had tried to take from me, my dignity, my voice, my narrative, had multiplied instead. Not into revenge. Into impact. I stopped thinking of my past as something that happened to me. It became something that shaped me. And I stopped seeing my story as a cautionary tale. It became a reminder. You don't need to prove your worth to people who benefit from your doubt. You don't need witnesses to walk away. You don't need permission to choose yourself. Some endings arrive loudly. Mine arrived quietly. And that was how I knew it was real. Because the strongest transformations don't ask to be seen. They simply are. The funny thing about endings is that you don't recognize them when they arrive. They don't announce themselves. They don't ask for closure. They simply stop hurting. It happened on an ordinary evening, months after everything had settled. I was walking home after a long day, keys in hand, mind occupied with tomorrow's plans, when I realized something startling. I hadn't thought about Brandon all day. Not once. No flash of anger. No quiet comparison. No need to explain myself to an imaginary audience. He had become irrelevant, not because I tried to erase him, but because my life had grown too full to revolve around an old wound. That was the moment I knew this chapter was truly over. My business was steady now, not flashy, not rushed, but honest. Clients came because they trusted me, not because I bent myself into shapes to please them. I spoke with clarity. I charged what my work was worth. I said no without guilt. Confidence, I learned, isn't loud. It's consistent. Sometimes people still asked about the engagement, usually with careful curiosity. I never corrected their assumptions aggressively. I never defended myself. I simply said, it ended because it needed to. And that was enough. Because the people who mattered understood without details. And the people who demanded details never mattered. One quiet Sunday, I sat alone with a notebook and wrote down everything I had learned, not for anyone else but for myself. A record not of pain, but of growth. I wrote about how love should never require shrinking, how concern should never feel like surveillance, how silence can be safer than explanations, how walking away doesn't make you weak, it makes you free. Then I closed the notebook, not because there was nothing left to say, but because I no longer needed reminders. I had become the proof. There was no dramatic confrontation at the end, no final message sent, no apology demanded or received, just distance. And distance did what arguments never could. It revealed the truth. I didn't lose a relationship. I recovered myself. And that is not something you mourn. That is something you protect. If someone ever asks me how I healed, I won't talk about time or therapy or strength. I'll say this instead. I stopped asking people who misunderstood me to validate my reality. Because the moment you stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you, your life opens up in ways you never imagined. This isn't a story about heartbreak. It's a story about return. Returning to intuition. Returning to boundaries. Returning to the quiet voice that always knew better. Some people come into your life to stay. Others come to teach. He was a lesson. I was the legacy. And this peace, this clarity, this wholeness is where the story truly ends.